Hello, this is Eric. Today is the 19th of December 2022, and I'm officially starting this series of videos on the history of my beloved country, Brazil. The main reason why I decided to make these videos is because I've recently noticed that there are practically no videos or no videos at all about the history and culture of Brazil in the English language. So although I'm not a history teacher or professor, I decided to provide foreigners from all over the world to get to know the actual and authentic history and culture of my country in a way that they are able to really understand it better. That is by hearing, this history in English. Okay? Today, we're going to be talking about the indigenous peoples in Brazil. And it's really sad that even nowadays, many Brazilians don't like to be identified by foreigners as indigenous. And there's also a great confusion regarding this term, because when the first explorers quote-unquote discovered not only this nation, but the continents here, the North American continent and the South American continent, they confused the inhabitants, in the people that lived and inhabited these continents with the Indians, with whom they had they traded commodities. So they start calling, by mistake, the people here as Indians, but it's wrong. And unfortunately, as I said, still nowadays, many Brazilians say that we have Indians here in the country. So it's a very sad mistake. And we gotta start, this video by emphasizing that the correct term is indigenous peoples. So there's a great diversity of indigenous peoples in the Brazilian territory, but along the largest groups, we have the Yanomami, Guajajara, and especially the Guaranis. Right here we have a picture of a Yanomami woman with her child. And it is estimated that, these indigenous peoples, they started to inhabit the territory around 12,000 years ago. But how did that happen? Well, how did that happen? Sorry. The truth is that we have many theories, right? The one that is most accepted by scholars in general is the theory that says that these first inhabitants of the North American continent and the North American continent and South American continent, they crossed what is nowadays called the Bering Strait, and it receives this name because of the explorer Vitus Johansen Bering that first navigated, this portion of waters that were and still are very dangerous, right? And as a matter of fact, he even died, in one of these, in one of his experiences navigating this area. So we can see here a picture of him. Right? And this is a picture of the Strait of Bering, right? Just a piece of information for you. It separates the American continent, more precisely Alaska in the USA, from the Asian continent, more precisely Cape Dezhnev in Russia. The Bering Sea, in turn, is a portion of water located in the Pacific Ocean with 2.3 million square kilometers and surrounded by the continents mentioned above to the east and west, and also to the south by the Aleutian Islands. Its widest point is about 2,400 kilometers long, and its narrowest point is just that of Bering. with only 85 kilometers from one end to the other. Okay, so you have some information about, this portion of the globe that is the Strait of Bering. And as I said, the peoples that originally came to the territory of Brazil arrived here around 12,000 years ago, right? But who are they? And also, how many of them do we have today? Well, when they came here, nobody's really sure of this number, but it is estimated that the indigenous peoples in Brazil were at the time when the Europeans came, they were around 5 million to 7 million of indigenous here. So obviously they were butchered, since the coming of the Europeans, both by the diseases that the Europeans brought and because of the way they were enslaved, especially in the first years when they were enslaved. Because after the Catholic priests came to Brazil, these Catholic priests protected the indigenous peoples, from the explorers in the territory. But even so, they were in some cases enslaved and they were killed, really murdered, along the centuries. So right now, according to a census from 2010, we have 817,000 indigenous registered in the territory. However, we are talking about a process of registration that is really, really questionable. What I'm trying to say is that this total number is based on a self-declaration, right? This is the method used by the census to identify this population in our country. However, there is a more technical term that could be used by researchers in the area. This more technical definition, is based on the definition given by the United Nations organization in 1986. And the understanding of the UN in the sense is that the communities, the peoples, and the indigenous nations are those that, by relying on the historical continuations of the previous societies, the societies that lived previously, before the invasion and the settlement that was developed in their territories, they consider themselves distinguished from other sectors in the society, and they are decided to conserve and to develop and convey to the future generations their ancestral territories and their ethnical identity as a basis of their continued existence as peoples in compliance with their own cultural standards, social institutions, and legal systems. There are also other factors that could be used to identify the indigenous peoples according to this method. Some of these factors are, for example, the historical continuity, that is the direct descendants of the peoples that inhabited here, the territory here before the coming of the Europeans. We have the culture. We have to take into consideration, the cultural characteristics and the practices and the traditions and the language and the beliefs. There's also the self-identification. The person must self-identify himself or herself as different compared to the society in which they are inserted. There are also other factors like the historical link with the territory, the existence of some social systems that are distinguished from the national society, and also the link that they have with other indigenous peoples. When the first Europeans came here, that's also another delusion that we have here concerning the indigenous peoples, because often when we are studying, the indigenous peoples, we see this pretty little faces here, this cute indigenous, and we think that, they were all angels like these, and that's not true, because yes, there were peaceful indigenous peoples, but there were also fierce and dangerous and violent indigenous peoples and tribes living in the area. So, when the Europeans came, they were after money. They were only interested in something that could benefit them, and they were violent and etc. But they also found violent people here, not only angelical, cute faces like this one. Okay, this is also something that we must say. What else? And to cap it all, there's also the question of isolation, right? We often find people here that question, the way that some indigenous live nowadays. And because of the way they live, these people say that these indigenous are not indigenous in reality, and that is not right. So, are the indigenous peoples obligated to live isolatedly? No. The fact of a person identified himself or herself as an indigenous, or to be identified, or to identify himself or herself as an Indian, does not obligate this person to anything. Therefore, it is a right of each individual indigenous to live in the way they prefer to live, whether it be isolated or whether close to the Brazilian society. So, an Indian has a right to choose if they want to live with their community or in a tribe, or if they want to live integrated in our society. So the fact that this this indigenous live isolated or integrated does not change at all the right of these indigenous peoples to fight for the preservation of their culture and their lands. Another important point is the fact that a person identified as an indigenous cannot lose the right of making use of the technology present in our society. Therefore, an indigenous has a right to use and to own any technology at all present in our society. Also being allowed to speak Portuguese, and that would not affect at all his or her identity as an indigenous. So remember that an indigenous has a right to live the way they want, to defend their people and to make use of any technology, and to think in whatever way they want to think. And anything that is contrary to that is fruit of prejudice and lack of knowledge. Okay? Well, so basically, this is what I had to tell you concerning the indigenous peoples, right? We are in Brazil. We didn't even think of indigenous peoples, in the 80s or in the 90s. Now they are being taken into consideration, and it is a progress, right? We are making progress, and soon we'll have more and more information regarding their history to study them and to treat them the way they deserve to be treated, that is, with respect in every way, okay? Well, thank you so much for watching this video, and don't miss out on the following videos that I'll be releasing here on my channel, okay? Bye-bye.